Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this week we're doing something a little bit different. Usually on this show, I will interview another entrepreneur. It's usually one other media operator of some sort. But for this week, I spoke to several. And it's actually a monthly thing I do with the paying subscribers for my newsletter. We have what I call a live office hours call on Zoom. We'll pick a topic to go deep on, and then we'll basically just spend an entire hour talking through that topic. And it's not me lecturing to everyone, it's more kind of like an open discussion. And what always amazes me about these office hours sessions is the level of expertise you find on them. In this week's office hours Zoom call, we talked about driving paid subscriptions. So how do you optimize for paid subscriptions? What kind of things get your free audience to convert into paying subscribers? How do you reduce churn? And the level of expertise was just amazing. I had one of the most popular podcasters in the world on this podcast on this episode. I had the one of the lead editors at the Financial Times, one of the most successful subscription publishers out there right now, has over 1 million subscribers. I had one of the most the proprietor of one of the most successful substacks that focus on kind of local news. There's just so much incredible expertise, and normally this is something that's locked behind a paywall. You can only participate in these sessions if you're a paying subscriber, and then I will record them and send them out as a video to the people who weren't able to attend live. This is a benefit if you subscribe. But this month my subscribers were gracious enough to allow me to release this video to everyone for free. And yeah, that's what this is. It's just to show you what you're missing out of on if you're not a paying subscriber. And if you want this level of expertise, of this networking, of the kind of insights that you're going to see getting shared there, just become a paid subscriber. Like, you're going to be supporting all the work I do, all the free content I put out for you. But then you'll also gain access to all these extra perks. I have been to several media industry, marketing industry conferences where I'm paying upwards of $800 to $1,000, and I have in all of those I've never had the level of access that I get just from these office hours calls. And it costs you a measly $50 a year to subscribe to my newsletter and get access to these live calls. In fact, if you use the link that's in the description, if you're listening to this as a podcast, it's in the podcast description. If you're watching as a video, it'd be down in the YouTube description. I'll actually put a link there where you can get 10% off for the first year. That's even cheaper price. Seriously, you should consider becoming a subscriber. This was a lot of fun. I got super pumped doing it. I'm super excited about these every month. I'm probably going to start actually hosting more frequently than I do now. So now is the best time to subscribe. Okay, well, without further ado, let's jump right into our discussion. Hey everyone, you all know who I am. I think most of you are paying subscribers. I think there was one or two people who maybe got invited who isn't a paying subscriber. If so, welcome. This is kind of my regular office hours. I do these currently once a month, but I'm always opening to doing them more. Like, if I got enough interest and enough subscribers who were tuning into these, I would definitely, host them every week, because I think, like, ultimately, in terms of value, when I talk to subscribers, they're like, yeah, I like some of your subscriber only content. But to be honest, like, when I'm talking to subscribers on the phone, a lot of them don't really even know what's behind a paywall and what's in front of the paywall. They're just receiving it in their inbox, and so they're just reading it. So it's an interesting tidbit to know, as you're on the topic of today of digital subscriptions, is your readers, once they're logged in, once they're receiving it, a lot of times they don't even know what's in front of the paywall, what's behind the paywall. So that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about out what you're going to, put behind the paywall. So for those curious, for the last several weeks, what I've been doing is running kind of these Q&A issues on Fridays. And Substack now has a feature that allows you to send the newsletter out to your free list, and then you can choose what, goes behind the paywall, so they get a free version. And what I've been doing is making it so the top answer is completely free to everyone, but if you want to read the second answer that I give to reader suggestions, you have to be, a paying subscriber. So that's how I'm kind of testing out paywalls and trying to push more people into my funnel. But again, I want to try to make this kind of community, this kind of sharing, this kind of networking as kind of, the main benefit, and also the videos of it. So people who are watching this after the fact. One thing I want to say before we start is my hope with these is that I don't spend the entire time talking. In fact, I would love just to shut up and hear from everyone else. There's so much expertise on these calls. I want this to be a truly collaborative experience. So I'm going to ask questions. Hopefully people will chime in with answers. And then, if you have like a really good answer, then we might have several follow-up questions for you or something like that. So I don't want to be the center of attention for these things. So all that being said, I did kind of jot down some notes. Like today, we're talking about, driving subscriptions. It doesn't necessarily have to be newsletter subscriptions. It could be podcast subscriptions. It can be just a paywall subscription, or even video subscriptions, or anything like that. Just like thinking about, how to optimize your content, how to convince someone who's kind of sampling your content to make that conversion, which, I've been doing this for over 2 years now myself. And obviously I've been interviewing a lot of you folks and other media entrepreneurs. It's just such a freaking hard thing to do. And I was talking to someone recently, and they were talking about the difference between like a $5 a month subscription and a $10 a month subscription. You think it would be twice as hard to get people to go at that higher price point, but really the hardest thing is just to sell a subscription at all. Like the barrier between $0 and $1 is so much higher than the barrier between $5 and $10. And I thought that was like a really good, observation that someone made. So let's get started. So what are some ways to optimize for subscriptions? I think at this point, we now have enough data. We've read enough case studies to where getting someone signed up for your newsletter is the leading indicator that they will become a subscriber. When all these publishers look at their analytics and they say, okay, what was the conversion rate of someone landing on my piece of content and converting, they find that people coming from like Facebook or Twitter, they're just converting at like extremely low rate compared to if they clicked on a link within their newsletter. So building that kind of daily habit, that intimacy, getting your readers to invite you into your inbox, that is always going to be the leading conversion. Jennifer, you run a membership for Dame, like you run Dame Magazine, which is a preeminent, well-known feminist magazine that you started. You use memberships, right?
Yeah.
And tell me about the relationship between your newsletter signups and converting people to members.
It's so funny that there are 2 points I want to punctuate. One, on the $5 to $10. Let me just underline that for you. I find that more often than not, people go to the next level, the $10 level, than they do. We put in a new platform called ChargeBee that we're using now for our memberships, and added this $10 price level, reworked our pricing levels. And now it's almost equal the number of people, $5 to $10. So it really is that $0 to $1, just getting them to decide to do it. Getting them to $10 has been very, very easy. But on the newsletter thing, I actually have I don't have hard data on it for you, but I actually have some anecdotal data.
Well, before you start with the newsletter thing, I want to touch on that now that you've talked about that. So do you offer any differentiation between the $5 and $10, or is it completely voluntary?
Swag.
Uh-huh.
It's literally, stickers versus keychains or whatever we have on there. So I think my sense is that they're just is not price sensitivity around that. If people are committed to sort of the kind of journalism that we produce and the lens that we produce it through, for them, the $10 is just not, there's no friction around it. Largely.
Yeah. And do you have like an open-ended amount where people can donate even more, or is it more?
No, we don't, and that's a function of the tech. What I do have on the page is we have a PayPal link. So if you want to just, you want to give us $1,000, please do, and here's the link for it. So it's really just the functionality.
Yeah.
We set it so that the highest monthly was 50, and you'd be surprised. There are a lot of people, I think not a lot, but there are more than I would have expected folks in the 25 to 50 range.
Yeah, and platforms like Substack are more rigid in terms of like what setting price points. I think Tony might know some more about this than I do. But I've talked to publishers by allowing a more open-ended, like setting a minimum floor of $5, $10, whatever it is, but allowing readers to pay more. They say you'd be surprised how just a few readers can kick in a huge percentage of your revenue.
Yeah, and we did that specifically. So I had very sort of, I tested a bunch of pricing models that were like oddball numbers, like 220 and 499. And my largest attrition came from the 220 level. And my most loyal people are at the $10 and above. So the ones who are sort of, I find that the price sensitivity is really about the attrition and the ability to give $5. Once they're past $10, it doesn't feel like there's any discomfort around that amount from a financial management standpoint on the part of the member.
Yeah, and you don't lock content behind a paywall?
No, we have that's very much our core mission, is that we do not have a paywall. But I was very curious to join today because I want to think more and learn more around sort of exclusive content, and ways perhaps that I can leverage that a bit better.
Yeah. Okay. So I interrupted you. You were about to talk about your newsletter and how that worked in conversions.
Yeah. So for many years, the newsletter was a very sort of one-sided thing. Here's our content, read it, click through, bye-bye, right? And then a quick roundup. About when we moved to this new platform ChargeBee, I decided that I would be the voice of the newsletter. Jennifer Reitman, the publisher, would sort of help you navigate what we're talking about. And I started doing a weekly sort of, I don't want to call it an essay because I'm not a writer, but just an introduction. Here's what's on my mind this week. And at the bottom of every one of those is a little note that says, I always want to hear from you. Tell me what's on your mind, or what did you think about this specific thing? Email me anytime. The number one, the impact to our open rates has gone up by 10%. We've had 10-point increase in open rates, more than 10, 14-point increase in open rates. And the conversion from the newsletter to membership has gone up by 30%.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so,
can I ask Jennifer a question?
Yeah.
Do you use lead magnets to get people onto your subscription list? And if so, are they behind a paywall, or are they behind something that requires them? So anybody can get your lead magnets.
Yep. There is no sort of put into your email and read the rest of this article. We don't have any of that. We try to be sort of as frictionless as possible, given the nature of what we produce content wise.
But to get them on the list originally, do you use them?
Nope. We're literally using traditional methods, right? It's traditional social media marketing, referral stuff.
Okay. And just to unpack what you're saying in terms of insights that others could use, is a lot of newsletters, they're just used to drive traffic to the website. They're a roundup of links. And what you're saying is, by adding a voice, by adding some editorial content, even though it's not like maybe your main featured content compared to your long form features that you're publishing at Dame Magazine, just that little bit of editorial voice, increase the open rate, increase the conversion rate. and was really effective that way.
And I can see it in real time too, right? I will
Yeah.
get lots of notes back from our readers and or our newsletter subscribers. Some are members already and feel that sort of connected relationship with us as a brand. Some of them are brand new to the site. And, I've gotten emails back that are 4 paragraphs long, and I've gotten emails back that are 2 sentences right on, I agree, or you're, off your nut with this idea. So
Yeah,
that's my little insight in terms of sort of, newsletter and conversions. It's very anecdotal though, right?
Yeah. So Mignon asked if you answer all those emails.
Every single one.
Yeah, I try to be pretty good about answering emails as well. And I'm trying to be as responsive as possible. If anybody comments, if anybody emails me, if anybody comments in my Facebook group, I just try to be as responsive as possible. Like, you talk to some of these YouTubers who have millions of followers, and at some point they can't answer the volume, but every successful creator, and I think media companies should steal this as well, is as long as you have the capacity, setting aside time each week to respond to your audience, you should always try to build that into your workflow.
Agree. Yeah. And I have, and I do.
Does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? Going once, going twice. Peter talked about lead magnets. And this is kind of leads to registration walls, getting people to either register or at least sign up for your email in order to view free content. I'm not the hugest fan of it because I think it just doesn't create a great user experience, but I understand why a lot of publishers are doing it, especially if they have like metered paywalls and stuff like that. Anybody here really experiment with registration walls at all? This is another thing so I think newsletters are the leading indicator in terms of getting people to convert into paid subscribers. The new thing that I see a lot of publishers focusing on is audio. And there are 2 different ways that they're doing this. One is through podcasts. So, so much about, and this is what kind of Jennifer alluded to, is the kind of intimacy of personal brand and using that to create brand affinity and then using that to drive conversions. And there's nothing that creates a stronger brand affinity than people, putting earphones into their ears and, listening to your voice over and over again. They develop these like parasocial relationships. Mignon, I'm sure you can speak to this in terms of like, I'm sure you have people who come up. Yeah, for context, Mignon has like a really famous podcast called Grammar Girl, gets millions and millions of downloads. I'm sure you have people come up to you all the time and say something to the effect of, I feel like I'm your friend.
I do. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I also find myself having that feeling about people whose podcasts I listen to and trying to check myself and remember, like, I don't actually know them, but it can be weird when someone comes up to you and they think they're your great friend and you don't know who they are. It can be weird, but it's also really nice. And I take it as a compliment and, try to remember it when I'm interacting on the other side as a podcast listener.
Yeah. And so, obviously I was leading with subscriptions, but I made sure to say subscriptions and other digital products, selling other digital products. I don't think you sell a subscription, but you certainly sell products. So how well do you think your podcasts, I don't know, it's hard to track conversions and stuff like that with the podcast since it's consumed in an app. But what's your general sense in terms of people who are buying your book? She writes New York Times best-selling books. And also you teach courses on like LinkedIn Learning and stuff like that. Do you get any sense of like what the relationship between your podcast and your success on these other mediums? Oh, you're on mute.
I think it's huge. I mean, the best example I have I'll give you 2 examples because the newsletter is also really important. So first, in terms of the podcast, I 100% believe that my first book became a New York Times bestseller because of the podcast. There were enough podcast listeners who were excited to support me in some way. It was essentially my first product that came out, was my first book. And, enough podcast listeners bought it to put it on the New York Times bestseller list, which was huge. And I don't think that would have happened without the podcast. It was close. I almost, at the bottom of the list, but still on the list. And then, but then when I launched my card game, Peeve Wars, build an army of peeves to annoy your opponent to death. We really found that the best driver of backers for the crowdfunding project was the email newsletter, much more so than the podcast. I mentioned it in the podcast and we'd see a little jump in backers that day. But when it went out in the email newsletter, that was always the best day.
Yeah. What about like driving conversions from a podcast in terms of there's two methods. You could create a really simple URL for them to go to that's really easy for them to remember. Or it's not it's an and/or, but putting a link in the description and they have to go into the show notes or whatever for their podcast app. Do you get a sense of like what your strategy is or what's best about driving people to something that you're selling or want them to view outside the podcast app?
I think you need both. I find that people, will say it's in the show notes, but I don't see a lot of uptake from the links in the show notes. I have links in there to my card game, for example, and unless I mention it and put it on social and put it in the newsletter, like nobody buys it from the links in the show notes. I think they're almost worthless. I also think people probably don't remember links very well either. I think you need to put those links on social and in your newsletter and get them in front of people because people, they're listening, they're doing other things. They're probably not going to remember the link. Nobody goes to the show notes. So I think that you need other ways to support people taking action. I do think it raises brand awareness and, but you need to remind people, oh yeah, I heard about that book in the podcast, but now I want to buy it because I'm somewhere where I see the link.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Mignon? You have one of the most popular podcasters on the earth, one of the foremost experts here. If you have any questions, Louis, I know you're looking to launch a podcast soon with your media startup. Anybody have any questions for Mignon?
Is the idea, Mignon, of the podcast, is it to direct people to other media, to direct to your products? What's the purpose of the podcast?
The podcast is big enough that it's one of the primary ways that I make money is through advertising in the podcast. It's probably a third to a half of all revenue. So, hi, yay, a fan. So just having traffic to the podcast alone is enough. But then, I do use it to promote, I think I've always tell people it's really important to have a diversified revenue plan. So, books and games and courses, and that's all I can think of off the top of my head. Sometimes I do public speaking, but, the more sources of revenue you can have, the better. So,
I guess what I'm wondering is what's the interaction between the podcast and your other avenues? I know it's usually, okay, the podcast feeds the newsletter feeds the podcast. How does that interact with everything that you're doing?
Well, Mignon, I actually think that you work at one of the most well-diverse media companies I've ever come across. Can you zoom out a little bit and tell Tony about the Quick and Dirty Tips Network? And it is actually monetized in a lot of different ways.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Grammar Girl, but I also founded the Quick and Dirty Tips Podcast Network, which now operates in partnership with Macmillan Publishers, and they handle all the day-to-day operations now. And so we have about 10 podcasts on all different topics like parenting, health, psychology, things like that. And finance. Yeah, that does really well. Finance and nutrition are, of course, some of the most popular. And we have podcasts and they're all monetized through advertising. And then the website, because it's evergreen searchable content, the website is also monetized through ads.
And and your brilliance for the website is great because you just take your podcast scripts and convert them into article articles, and it's all quick and dirty tips, so it's like SEO optimized. So quick and dirty tips is a monster SEO powerhouse in terms of driving traffic. You were talking before we started today that now that it's back to school season, you guys are just seeing more traffic than ever, so you're able to monetize through like programmatic ads and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fall is our best season because it's back to school, and also business people are, seem most serious about work right before in this time in the fall. So it's our best season. We see a drop off in the summer when everyone's relaxing. And, we all have newsletters. We don't monetize our newsletters right now, but we're thinking about adding subscription levels for the newsletters. Most of us have books. I have 7 books, but most of the hosts in the network have 1 book at least.
Yeah. So let's walk through all your monetization. So you sell podcast ads. There's a massive network. So the ads on podcasts have really high CPM. You have programmatic advertising on the website, which we establish has a ton of traffic. You have most of your podcast hosts actually sign book contracts with Macmillan. So you're selling books. You also teach a course on LinkedIn Learning, right?
Right. I have 3 courses, and I'm actually talking to them this afternoon about doing another one, and those are great.
Yeah. And then you also do public speaking.
Right. Yep. Sometimes
and
I don't enjoy it. So I don't do it much, but I can.
And then up until recently, you were a journalism professor as well. So you had 6 different revenue streams.
Right. Yeah. A lot. And you forgot games.
Oh, and games as well. You did that through Kickstarter, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can I ask who sells your advertising?
Yeah, we are partnered with Midroll, which they were just bought by SiriusXM bought Midroll. So, but their branding is still Midroll. So, and we actually, an interesting thing, we just revamped our website a couple of weeks ago to highlight the podcasts more, because, the podcast ad rates are much better than the web ad rates. So we're trying to push the podcasting above the website now.
Nice. Has anyone or anybody have any more questions for Mignon?
Yeah, Mignon, what did you, in terms of your sequencing, do you think it's more important to have the newsletter first or the podcast first in terms of rollout? If somebody's got a website, should they be focusing first on a newsletter or on trying to create a podcast and drive people to your site?
That's a great question. I think I would do the newsletter first. I just find that the newsletter is our most powerful marketing tool. I think the podcast supports it and creates that bond with people, but just in terms of the ease of doing it, it's easier to make a newsletter than a podcast. And in terms of marketing power, I think a newsletter is actually more powerful than a podcast. So I would do the newsletter first.
If you and if I could ask a follow-up, most of my business is B2B. So I've been thinking about a LinkedIn newsletter also. Would you do both, or would you pick one or the other?
I've been watching the LinkedIn newsletters with great interest because I'm in touch with a lot of B2B people there that I network with, and they seem to be using those LinkedIn newsletters to great success. I don't know a lot about it myself, but just yesterday I got one and I saw it had huge engagement when I went to look at it. And I was thinking, God, maybe we should be doing that there too. So I think it's really interesting. I don't have great, detailed insights, but yeah, it looks good.
I guess like LinkedIn, I thought I asked someone who was doing it. I don't know that you can export your email list. You may be able to, but that's just something you should think of as you're considering whether to do LinkedIn newsletters. It might be an additional add-on, but if it doesn't allow you to export your list, you should put most of your content on, or most of your efforts on, a list that you can control. Has anybody here experimented with podcasts that are locked behind a paywall?
We did one maybe 10 years ago and didn't get a lot of uptake, but the market is completely different now. So I don't know.
Yeah, my sense is that at the individual level, it can be, an incredibly powerful driver of, for you see some of these podcasts on Patreon that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. But other than Slate and a handful of others, I haven't seen a lot of large publishers experimenting that much with putting stuff behind a paywall. And it's something that I haven't really experimented myself, just because I just don't want to put all that effort into something that someone is not that many people are listening to. So
one thing we're thinking of doing is Apple and Spotify have premium subscriptions, and we're thinking of just putting an ad-free version
yeah.
for people who would want it there.
Yeah, I've never seen good data on how much the ad-free version, how much people really even care about ad-free stuff. I interviewed the guy Brian McCullough, who runs the Tech Meme Ride Home podcast, and he put a version of that behind a paywall that was ad free, and he finally just gave up on it because it wasn't driving meaningful revenue. So I think of it as like a nice add-on, a nice little perk you can give to members, but I don't know it's like a main driver of people becoming subscribers, is the sense that I get.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anyone making really good money at it. It would be just a little add-on. Yeah.
Okay, so if nobody else has anything to add with podcasts, I purposefully started this by talking about audio. And one thing that I've seen more and more publishers do, and something that I've even seen a few case studies that has shown incredible conversion and retention rates, and you've probably noticed it, is that more and more publishers are embedding audio files at the top of their articles. They're either getting AIs to read their content like automatically, or they're hiring paid voice actors to actually record versions of each article. Substack just rolled out functionality that'll allow you to do this and embed an audio version of it. So this is something I've been if you looked at my to-do list, I have at the somewhere near the top of the to-do list, experiment with audio versions of your newsletter. Has anybody else experimented? Jennifer, you said that you're talking about doing this. Maybe you're on mute.
We're about to test it all in our articles and start recording all of our Q&As. And then my plan is to figure out how we can get little teaser blurbs into the newsletter as opposed to the written slug, and see what that does in terms of, are people having more fun?
Yeah. One thing I didn't have on my list here that I want to talk about is the idea of and this will apply more to kind of B2B, but like the enterprise level sales of, instead of selling by one, going to institutions, whether it's like college libraries and stuff like that, or companies within your space, or government institutions. Louis, you did some of this, right, in terms of selling institutional group subscriptions. What was your strategy there? So first, just say your name and what you do.
Yes. Well, this Louis writes climate risk review, which was acquired by a climate tech company last year called Manifest Climate. It is a business-to-business focused newsletter, and I cover climate-related financial risk management regulation, which is a growing issue within banks, asset managers, and the like. And I started with a free subscription on Substack, and after about 6 months, introduced paid version at $15 a month. So it's kind of on the high end because I knew it was a business clientele I was kind of marketing to. And I actually found that most of my initial revenue from going paid was actually people coming to me and say, hey, Louis, I work at this company. Can I get a group discount? Can I get an enterprise-wide subscription? And because it was early days, I was kind of making up the numbers as I go. And I probably could have pushed the numbers up a little bit higher than I ended up doing. But I think I had at the height, I had about 8 or 9 companies who had enterprise subscriptions of between $1,000 and $2,000 each, covering between for a year subscription, covering between 10 and 20 people each. So yeah, my pricing, I hadn't worked out the pricing model really. I just kind of did it quickly on an Excel spreadsheet and tried to offer a decent discount that wasn't too generous. But I did find that was a good driver of revenue for me, and that would be a big slug into my bank account to kind of accompany all the little drip of individual subscriptions. But I think I wouldn't have had that interest from enterprise subscribers if I hadn't had been pumping out content on the free list and putting a lot of links and redirects to my content on LinkedIn, which is the forum. It's my main social network. I don't really advertise much on Twitter. It's all on LinkedIn, and I think that's where I found like the people who work at companies who knew that they would have the expense account to pay for this kind of product. So yeah, I think it is a worthwhile thing to do, is to try enterprise subscriptions. I do think if I could do it again, I would have been a bit more careful on the pricing, and I would have had a more. If I found an individual who signed up, who I thought, oh, I could probably upsell to an enterprise subscription, I would have tried more, kind of direct marketing to those individuals trying to upsell. But because this was more of a part-time gig rather than a full-time gig, I didn't go down that route.
Yeah, I just the episode hasn't come out yet, but I just interviewed a guy who has a very a B2B newsletter that covers the business of college sports, and he was talking about how he's doing more and more enterprise sales. But like you said, like you really only have like so much time. So he's actually thinking of hiring like a commission-based salesperson to just kind of, approach these these companies on a one-to-one basis and pitch them on buying dozens or hundreds of subscriptions at a discount, and you can scale up your revenue very quickly that way, much more quickly if you're charging on a one-to-one basis. Did you add like calls to action within the newsletter saying something to the effect of like, hey, do you work at a company that would that might want to buy multiple subscriptions? Contact me and I can give you a good group rate or anything like that? Or was it more like a one-to-one basis?
I did put blurbs at the top of my paid for newsletters. So they were the newsletters that were behind the paywall, so I knew they were only being read by people who were already paid for the content. I would put like, interested in the group subscription, enterprise subscription, get in touch. But I feel like actually Substack's functionality has come a bit better now. So, it's sort of like custom button. I never got into the habit of doing custom buttons or more elaborate sort of capturing mechanisms for enterprise subscriptions. It was just like a blurb at the top of the email. A lot of it came direct. People would email me saying, "Hey, Louis, can I get a group-wide subscription?" Yeah.
Do any people have any questions for Louis? Oh, sure.
Well, can I quickly go to Mignon again and ask about podcasts? Because as Simon said, we are introducing the podcast at Manifest Climate, and one thing I'm interested in is I see that your podcast, because by its nature, you have short episodes, longer episodes. Are you able to analyze sort of the cutoff, the drop off versus long and short, and do people get annoyed when they expect a podcast of a certain length and then they only get like a few minutes?
That's a great question. The only data, so our completion rates are really high, which I think in part at least is due to the fact that they're shorter than most podcasts. They've gotten longer over the years. So when I first started, my podcast was 3 or 4 minutes. And now it's more like 12 to 15 minutes. And we still get, completion rates in the 90% and up range, which is great. So exciting. I'm always happy when I see that. And then occasionally I do interviews that are longer, and they run like 25 to 30 minutes. And we do see a slight drop off in completion rate, but it's not dramatic. And I always worried that, I have these the interviews are very different from the other shows, and I do them every 1 or 2 months. And I wondered if people wouldn't like them as much or would stop listening when they see it's an interview, but we haven't seen any of that. And, a few years ago now, but when I was out on my book tour, I asked people if, how they felt, and it was great. They said, we trust you. So we listen to your podcast because we like what you do. And if you think someone is worth interviewing for 25 or 30 minutes, then, we trust you that you made that choice and we want to listen to that. So it was really, gratifying and surprising to me. I thought people, I think I get a little annoyed when I listen to a podcast and it's completely different from their standard format, but in general, it doesn't seem to bother people, at least for us.
Yeah. Malcolm, you said in the comments that you experimented with automated robot voice. Can you tell us a little bit like why that didn't work out? And please start by introducing yourself and where you work.
Hi, I'm Malcolm. I'm an editor at the Financial Times in London. Mm-hmm. So we've actually experimented with 2 different synthetic voices, and for 2 different reasons. So we used, I think it's called Amy from AWS, and we put that on all of our articles several years ago, and it's still available in our app as well. And we've also been working recently, I think, with Microsoft on using their synthetic voice to try and produce a daily news bulletin, like a short news digest. I don't have any data on how many people are clicking, but I don't think there's a lot of momentum to expand the two programs. And I think it is a bit strange to listen to. I mean, the robot voices are great. It is amazing what they can do, but it's definitely not a real person. Like you would, and obviously we wouldn't get an actor to. Oh, sorry, I should say we also have partnerships with a company called Curio, which does have actors, and they select some of our pieces and get them voiced by actors. And I know obviously the several US publications using, I think it's called Audem.
New York Times owns it.
Now, we've been thinking about this. I'm in the process. We've just launched a new FT app, which I'm in charge of. And in this app, it's kind of like a limited subscription. So you only get 8 stories a day for your subscription. And so with only 8 stories a day, we could actually go and get them all recorded. And we thought about it a lot. But after trying it a little bit, I'm not persuaded that written articles translate very well to being read out. I mean, I think there is a great skill in podcasting and a great skill in radio, and these scripts are just different. And I listen to the New York Times Daily. I'm sure you all do. And the episodes of the Daily I like the least are the ones where the reporters read out their stories. I just find it difficult to engage with the material in the same way. So I'm not convinced that actually something that's designed to be read in your head works being read to you.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the app. I get questions about apps. It's something that I'm don't have a lot of expertise in. My general sense is, it's really hard. For most news organizations, it's just not worth doing an app. But obviously the Financial Times has such an amazing brand, an amazing content funnel. You guys just reached, within the last year or two, 1 million paying subscribers, and you have the hardest paywall out there. I mean, maybe the information might be comparable, but there is no leaky paywall at all with the Financial Times. I think you charge about $400 a year for a main subscription. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but now and I think maybe there are a small number of other publishers, maybe The Economist, I can't remember, or maybe it was The Information. You mentioned that you've launched this new app that's less expensive. How much does that cost?
So at the moment, it's free for a month, and then it's 99 cents a month for 6 months. And then we haven't decided really on the pricing after 6 months.
Yeah. So is the idea there is just additional revenue for people who will never convert, or do you think that's obviously it's way too early now, but is the hope that they'll convert into, more enterprise level, or maybe that's not the right word, but more expensive subscriptions later on?
It's an additional audience. It's not a conversion tool. So basically, what we saw during the pandemic was lots of people coming to the Financial Times for, who were new to us. We're guessing it's for journalism that's kind of politically neutral and deeply. We've got a lot of resources here, obviously, and so we're still producing very high quality journalism. And we just wondered whether actually there was another audience of people who wanted that kind of journalism, but just at a lower price point.
Yeah.
So we think about our core audience as, we call them professional readers. That's the demographic. And they're people who would use the Financial Times in their work, right? So they're willing to pay the $400 a year because there's information in there they use to make decisions related to their careers. This other audience, we think they probably have subscriptions to other news organizations, but what we found when we did some research was that there was the problems we were trying to solve are basically the problems of people feeling overwhelmed by the news. Like there's a lot of stuff and they're reading all day, but they end each day not really understanding the issues that they wanted to understand. So that was basically the issue. Like, could we find explanatory Financial Times journalism that would help people understand these issues and then sell it at a price point that they could afford?
And the Financial Times, it has some really popular free podcasts, right?
Yeah, we have a lot of free. The most popular one is actually our daily news briefing, which is recorded in New York by Mark Filipino.
Do you get a sense that that's helping you with in terms of driving subscriptions?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think what we are beginning to be aware of is that we have this, I think it's 1.2 million subscribers now, and that's our core audience. And that basically has given us the flexibility to try and experiment with other audiences. And I think we've become aware that actually through the podcasts and through other things, we're attracting different sorts of people. You know, we have I can't remember how many it is now. I think it's 30 million people subscribe to our social media feeds. So if you think that, you know, there must be 29 million people out there who are aware of the brand, but who aren't currently, subscribing.
Yeah. Do you lock any podcasts behind a paywall?
No.
Wow. I mean, I just, especially Financial Times has such a great brand and such, discerning readers, highly educated readers. I wonder if they're, especially like incorporating it into your app and stuff like that, like subscriber only podcast. I wonder if there's like a real market for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're just starting to try and work out, what might be possible.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Malcolm?
I love this notion of sort of finding audiences on the fringe of your core audience. We're doing, I'm going to laugh really hard, very different from the Financial Times. We're launching a pet newsletter tomorrow. Actually, tomorrow's our launch day, because in our data, so much of our audience is pet obsessed. And so we made this decision to capitalize on the relationships that we have as a brand with high profile people like Soledad O'Brien and Roxane Gay and Martha Plimpton, all of whom have animals. And we're launching this interview Q&A style newsletter, interviewing these, interesting, well-known people about their pets.
Yeah.
But it really, it just as you were saying, there are these sort of overlapping kind of fringe audiences. And I'm sure that a large portion of the people who will come in and subscribe to the Companion Chronicles are not highly political activists, social justice, obsessed with every news thing, but love dogs and cats. So I liked your point. That was it. I just wanted to say that encourages me a little bit as a, tiny speck of sand relative to the Financial Times.
Mm-hmm. Charlie, I don't know if you're still driving and can't talk, but you talked about like you helped found like a company that supplies audio to media companies. Have you gotten any sense of how this helps in terms of driving subscriptions or anything like that?
Yeah, I've been a rainstorm now, so if the background noise is annoying, I apologize on behalf of Mother Nature. My experience is that it is a nice to have, but I think the point that artificial voices aren't where they need to be make it difficult to scale. So many organizations turn out so much content. The challenge of turning them all, or even a lot of them, into listenable, engaging audio is a challenge. What we've done at Rivet, now Rivet 360, is focus on.
Oh, sorry. Let me just stop you for a second and just put context. Sure. Charlie was the founding newsletter editor of the Chicago Tribune. So just so you get a sense of his expertise. Okay, keep on going.
Yeah, and before that, 20 years in radio news. So
yeah.
Much of my career has been about knitting together traditional broadcasting expertise with this new digital world, where it was new in 1998 when I joined the Tribune. So the bottom line, I mean, a lot of my effort over the last 10 years or so, 9 and a half years, has been teaching people how to take audio content or written content and make it work for the ear. So much of the written text that news organizations produce does not translate to good listening. Little things like contractions and pronouns that we take for granted in our everyday speech don't occur naturally in wire copy or newspaper or magazine copy. So there's a lot of work to be done to massage
Yeah, Charlie, you're going in and out for me. We'll have to touch on this at a little bit later time. I wanted to. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to touch on one other thing. And it's the thing that a lot of publishers are. Sorry, yeah, I can. Let's table this for now.
Yeah,
We'll just talk about
Good
it. Yeah.
enough.
Okay. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of more publishers experiment with, and they're publishing these case studies that are showing really good conversion rates, and that's things like games and quizzes. And you might be saying to yourself, I don't have the resources for games, but like a simple quiz, there's so much third-party software out there, and taking your own institutional knowledge and just creating like trivia around your industry, either evergreen trivia or like news peg trivia. I think it would be very simple to add that into your workflow. And if you have more resources, you could start, experimenting a little with games. Tony, you run the Charlotte Ledger, which is a Charlotte, North Carolina based newsletter that covers kind of like the business sector. You're held up as one of the most successful local media organizations on Substack. You started experimenting with crossword puzzles recently?
Yeah, we started crossword puzzles, a series of crossword puzzles. We had someone who was interested in that, wanted to kind of run with that. We got a sponsor for it that defrays some of the costs, found a local creator. The thing is, they're local crosswords with some local clues and themes, and we can tie into local festivals. I have to say, I mean, the uptake on it is not great. I mean, we're only getting probably about 1% of the people download it, but the people who love it really love it, and I can see they're sharing it. So I don't have great visibility into what it's done for us. I think it probably helps with retention and a little bit of awareness that's out there, but our plan is to do 30 of them, package them into a book, and sell it as like a local Charlotte, North Carolina crosswords, like in time for Christmas kind of a thing. So we're just sort of experimenting, a little inconclusive, but yeah, I mean, people who love it. Most people don't download it.
Yeah. How can you tell who's downloading it?
I mean, we just know anecdotally. We've done a few kind of contests, like, hey, solve this crossword, and we'll send you a prize, or you'll be entered into a raffle for this and that. So we have a list. We know the people who have entered those. I don't know exactly who's downloading them. I can see I can see the percentages of click throughs and stuff like that. But we have a little bit of a list, and we just anecdotally, people are, if we don't have one week, they're like, what happened to the crossword this week? That kind of thing.
Really? Yeah, because like obviously the New York Times, it has a monster games business, but there's now case studies coming out of the New Yorker that it's good for conversion, but what they say it's really good is for reducing churn.
Yeah.
And the New Yorker has just seen a tremendous amount of decreased churn as a result of really scaling up its crosswords. I think it just had like one a week in the actual print magazine, and now it has like a daily crossword. Does the Financial Times do anything with crosswords or anything like that?
So I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but currently, if you want to do the Financial Times crossword, you have to print it out off our website.
Yeah.
But I think we're just about to digitize it. I think that's happening this year. So
yeah. Do you have like hardcore readers who just do that religiously?
I think so. Yeah. I think all British papers have got crosswords, and most also have a variety of other games now. We still just have a crossword, but I think it would be great to have more. And I keep saying this to people, but I think they're tired of me bothering them about it.
Yeah, Mignon, I know you do physical games, but I feel like a interactive grammar game of some sort is a no-brainer.
Yeah, you're right. We don't have that, and our games, I'm really proud that they exist, but I would not say they've been financially successful. It's maybe 1 to 2% of revenue. The digital game is a standalone app, so it doesn't really interact with the other products in any way. It doesn't go out in the newsletter or anything like that. In my experience, it takes a lot of work to make a game.
Yeah. Anybody else here experiment with quizzes, games? Games are hard, but quizzes are easy, I feel like.
We're launching that with our pets thing, so I'll let you know how it goes.
What are you gonna? What kind of thing
We're
are you?
launching a series of, we'll have a mix of regular like true or false trivia, and then a series of quizzes, and it's all embedded in, and we'll see. I'm hoping it's, you know, successful, and that people, that it helps really just mostly with traction and keeping people engaged and sticking around. I don't have a hope, you know, our game strategy will end up being focused probably around crossword puzzles and not actual games. And that's a resource issue more than anything else.
Yeah.
But we'll see. This is my first foray into anything in this category, and it feels low lift when it comes to like true or false. The golden Toodle is a new brand, you know, it's not quite as intellectually challenging in some ways when you're talking about animal trivia.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thanks for doing this. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I'm going to keep talking afterwards. So stopping the recording now.